Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, streakers, leakers, and havoc wreakers, welcome along to the Joe Spiver YouTube channel, where we discuss books and little else. And you join me on a typically horrendous day, a December day here in the north of England. To use an adage that today's author might have been proud of, the winter has gone away during the summer and done its homework. It's done its recitals, read its lines, practiced on, and has sharpened its skills and is now much better at being winter than it was last winter. It is better at being windy, better at being chilly, better at lowering its temperatures. It's awful. And so for me to record in my usual setting of my living room would be disadvantageous. You wouldn't be able to see me. It's pitch black, even though it's early afternoon here in Northern England. So I have come back to the Hollywood-esque studio that you saw for my bookshelf tour. The lighting is a little bit better. I can control it. I've got people to pamper me. I've got a fluffer down below for my premium viewers. I'm sure you're enjoying that just now. And you'll also see that I've got a rather razzmatazz, rather sort of vibrant tie-dye shirt on. Some of you, for some reason, have got me down as some priggish wearer of tweed, some finger-wagging Jesuit that is, as I say, a stickler for rules. Well, look at me here, the quintessential festival goer. All I need is an affiliation with Catfish and the Bottlemen and mind-altering drugs, and I'm there. But anyway, that is enough. Today we are looking at someone that I mentioned in my TBR, what I've been reading over the weekend. This is Martin Amis's The Information. Now, Mr. Amis is famous for being very many things. He was the son of the post-war popular writer Kingsley Amis, who wrote things like Lucky Jim, and he wrote a style guide, and never, his single finest characteristic from there on in was being Kingsley Amis's son. Even when I was going through the Wikipedia page for Martin a little bit earlier on, I think it's the last line was, much like his father, Martin Amis died at age 73. So never could he escape such a shadow. He is also famous for being a rather Jagger-esque, irreverent, very successful prose stylist. His works are characterised as being sort of quite grandiose, prosaic, rather ornate, curlicued, cornist, very thought and sometimes overwrought, as we'll go into, prose styles. He was a very good book reviewer of non-fiction, and also something that links in particular with this book is his absolutely unheard of advances. Just unspendable amounts of money he was given to write fiction. For this one in particular, he was given, I think it's £500,000, it was reported as, to many of the scurrilous British press. He fell out with his initial literary agent over it, who initially gave him, or offered him £300,000, and he denied that and went for somebody else who's a little bit more wily and a little bit more wise for getting his authors lots and lots of money. The original literary agent happened to be the wife of Julian Barnes, who was his friend and then wasn't his friend and then was his friend again. But that's about it. Okay, let us get into the book proper. This was written in 1995 and is a story of literary envy. It puts you at the coalface of the publishing industry. You have one writer, Richard Tull, who is a jobbing hack, a minor novelist but unsuccessful, who does book reviews. He's cynical and unscrupulous and hedonistic and what else? He is high-minded and a little bit highfalutin and snobby. And then you have Gwyn, who is Gwyn Barry, who is a just mind-numbingly bien pensant, basic, brainless, dim-witted, and yet a very, very, very thoroughly successful author, and the resentment that conjures up. Richard Tull, whose perspective takes on most of the book, writes for The Little Magazine, I think it's called, his little publication, and his books have been called Dreams Don't Mean Anything and Untitled, which is just typical of Amis being a little bit of a busybody and messing about. And Gwyn Barry, they went to Oxford together. Gwyn Barry has written one called Emelior, one called Summertown, and then his newest booming success is Emelior Regained, I think it's called, which is obviously a little bit of a look at Paradise Lost and yada yada yada, Paradise Found or Regained, and yeah, that follows it. Richard and Gwyn go on a tour of America together. Their joint literary agent, what's her name? Gal, I think her name is, or something like that. Alp arranges that, and yeah, I've got an awful lot of misgivings about this. I've all sorts of things that I want to excoriate and talk to you about. So, first of all, it has to be said that Martin Amis is my literary gatekeeper. He gave me my readerly armbands and told me that, come on in, the water's all lovely. Until then, Words on a Page had been the work of scholarly pedagogy, of, all of the academic rigour that we talk about, just learning facts and bullet points, and yeah, was just thoroughly indifferent to Words on a Page. And then I picked up, well, a great deal of what Amis wrote. I think it was probably Money, the first thing that I read, and was absolutely blown away. He was experimental and really rather flamboyant and exuberant and funny and vivacious and the rest of it. And it was he was authorial company which I delighted in. As I've grown, I've become less and less enamoured by Amis's fiction in particular, and I wondered why that was. I was reading this. It's got your two anti-heroes that Amis is very, very famous for conjuring up. A loutish, imbecilic, disgustingly cynical, again hedonistic, some gutter dweller that doesn't care about anything but his own pre-apple desires to impregnate women. And I wondered why that was. I wondered why it was that all of a sudden these sexless, resentful, savage imbeciles no longer appeal to me. And that's because, believe it or not, I am no longer a sexless, resentful, savage imbecile anymore. And so I don't feel affiliation with these personas that Amis is conjuring up. His women in this, as per usual, Gwyn's wife, Demeter, and Richard's wife is called Gina, are faceless and footless idiots that do nothing but satisfy the men sexually and have minor careers of themselves, but don't have internal thoughts or any sort of the kind of mental conflict which afflicts Richard in particular. And yeah, the reason that doesn't chime with me anymore is because I have widened my viewpoints on literature. I no longer resign myself to just this and to whatever else might come up. I now consider myself to be, at least canonically, reasonably widely read, and I know about characterization and plot density and pacing and dialogue and just how you move people from one setting to another, how conceptually you move from one place to another. And Amis can't do that, unfortunately. He very rarely was able to do that. Nothing happens in this book. Next to nothing happens in this book. As I say, two book writers that don't get on, that are long-lost friends, essentially, but they go around America to Boston and New York and Los Angeles and have different views upon the individualism and commercialism of that epoch of America. But nothing goes on. Nobody has an exchange, nobody does anything revolutionary, nobody has a profound conversation. This is smattered with Amis's own sort of cosmological analysis about supernovas and big stars and dying stars, and how we're all just part of a dying star, trying to be sort of dude bro profound. Mr. Gwynbarry is up for a award called the Profundity Requital, which is meant to be, I don't know what it's meant to be, but anyway, conceptually this book has all the right things. It's got resentment and sort of inter-friendly rivalry and grit and determination, and that's a decent stall to set out originally. It's got the what I'm sure we'll all regard as the bizarre and curious lack of correspondence between a work's inherent objective quality and its commercial success. We don't have to look at the biggest and best and most successful writers to know that it very much does not depend upon the quality of the work as to how rich you become. It just it just depends largely on how well you access or tap into or plug into a bit of the zeitgeist, rather than, as I say, the objective qualities and merits of your work. So there's a great concept that you could really get a right good novel out of. Amos knew all sorts about this. Obviously, he'd been a book reviewer and a successful novelist for decades at this point, since about 75, so he knows all of that, but he just can't help telling you how much he knows about the world and these sort of weird little profundities that he talks about all men find it difficult getting out of a taxi, and just these weird phallic references, and how just reductivism about women. All women do this, all men do that. Oh gosh, isn't time such a bitch? Yada yada yada. It's just such a great concept, and Amos is clearly very capable, and he cannot do it. Unfortunately, it's really, really, really disappointing. But it allows me to chart my readerly progression, because I used to think that this man, I used to worship every single bit of ground that this gentleman walked on, and now most of the fiction I can't stand. The non-fiction remains excellent, and the only time that this book really, really, really makes me giggle, or makes me laugh, or made me to furrow my brow, or raise my eyebrows, or made me smirk, was when he was talking about his non-fiction, and how, when he was imposing his own non-fiction, his reviews for which Richard Tull writes, onto the book. So I've got a few things that I want to read out. It'll give you a little bit of a taste of what he's talking about. This is when Richard is looking at Gwyn's output, which obviously he condemns as terrible, and yet also is resentful of the amount of millions that has showered Gwyn in. So this is talking about Gwyn's first novel was no less autobiographical than most first novels. Richard was in it, clumsily and perfunctorily disguised, still the promiscuous communist with his poetry and his ponytail, but affectionately and even romantically rendered. The Gwyn figure who narrated was wan and Welsh, the sort of character who, according to novelistic convention, quietly does all the noticing, whereas reality usually sees to it that the perspiring mute is just a perspiring mute with nothing to contribute. Still, the Gwyn figure, Richard conceded, was the book's only strength, an authentic dud, a dud insider who brought back hard news from the dud world. The rest of it was the purest Trex, fantastically pedestrian. It tried to be touching, but the only touching thing about Summertown was that it thought it was a novel. On publication it met with modest sales and disgracefully unmalicious reviews. The following year, a small paperback edition limped along for a month or two. And that's all very good, isn't it? That's all pyrotechnical and full, wrapped with insight and condemnation and judgment, and it's all great. But that has no place in a piece of fiction. That should have just been one of Amos's non-fictional book reviews. We have next up, we're talking about, this is a little bit of a scene setting. Richard Tull lives on a place called Calchalk Street. Offered gentrification, Calchalk Street had said, no thanks. Instead it reassumed a post-war identity of rationing and rent books. Offered colour, it stayed monochrome. Even the Asians and West Indians who lived there had somehow become Saxonised. They loped and leered, they peed, V'd, queued, effed and blinded, just like the locals. Calchalk Street had a terrible pub, the Adam and Eve, the scene for Richard of many a quivering glassful and a terrible sub-post office, outside which, at 8 o'clock, every weekday morning, a queue of Hilders and Gilders, of nobbies and noddies, desperately coalesced, clutching forms. Now, again, stylistically and rhythmically, that's excellent. It bounces along and is very, very pleasing to the auricular senses. You hear it and you think, wow, this guy's really in charge. But unfortunately, those are the only positives about this book. I've got one of the last bits that I wanted to so it's very, very, very pleasantly idiosyncratic, but isn't very effective. Gwyn and Richard and Demeter and Gilda and some of the dukes that are introduced later on, nobody changes in this. There's a bloke called Steve Cousins who Richard pays to beat up and burgle Gwyn. Nobody ever changes. There's no transformation, no evolution, as many people would have it. There's nothing like that. No adaptation to this weird world. So it let me down. This is when we talk about, again, book reviews. It was the signing that had killed him. This is when Richard and Gwyn are both in America and they're at book signings. Keats was killed by a review. Richard was killed by a signing. Of the reading, you could at least say that there weren't many people there to see it, but his audience for the signing was biblically vast. Submitted to demand, Gwyn had given a shortened reading in 3 sittings, and everyone stuck around. So while his friend and rival exhausted 4 whole ball points, signing Amelia Regained, Amelia, Summertown, signing programmes, flyers, press photographs, signing autograph books, plaster casts, girls' forearms, girls' inner thighs, Richard sat at the other table for 2 hours doing nothing. In the past and in various capacities, none of them exalted, he had hung around at fairs and festivals and studied, with casual enmity, the signing cues of writers. Each cue, like each book and each writer, had a genre it belonged to. The countercultural, the contentedly pedagogic, the straggly, the ramrod orderly, the playful, the earnest, as well as all the other emphases of class, age, sex and race. And Gwyn's cue, it had to be admitted, looked like the universal. Here they came, stepping up the gangway to the arch of the arc of the future. Again, it's really, really good. Amy's clearly knows what he's doing, but whenever he sits in front of a desk and does fiction, he can only do one thing, which is talk about himself. Very, very thinly veiled versions of himself. He's got the fingerprints of John Updike, Philip Roth, and Saul Bellow, who all, a triumvirate that Amos idolised and met and befriended and just seemed to copy, and whose legacy he sought to basically extend. Amos died about last year from esophageal cancer because all he did was smoke cigarettes, and he, again and again, all of his protagonists smoke and drink and fornicate in the most bestial manner. But that is just about it, I think. I'm not going to be able to wander for much longer. I will always give Amos a little bit of credit for welcoming me into the readerly world. It could well be argued without him I might not be here talking to you with such profundity and such effervescence, which I'm sure you all love and enjoy. But that has been my review of Amos's The Information. It's not small either. If it was sort of a bit of a crotch scratching or a bit of a pimple popping, then I wouldn't really mind. But this thing is 500 pages, so it was a long weekend of reading. But there we are. I'll throw that, windmill that, and pop it back onto my bookshelf, which I will be touring for you a little later on in the week. But yes, that was Amos's Information. If you want to know whether you're going to chime with the voice or not, this won the Somerset Maugham Award. This is the Rachel Papers. Again, it's just a tissue which what's his name in this? What's his name? Charles Highway will wipe away his sputum from his chest on. That's again, it's just a fiddling academic not knowing what he's doing. But if you're going to enjoy Amos, if you're going to hate Amos, you're going to hate this. But it's a shorter work. And is prototypical of everything that he went on to do, really. He never really grew up. There's bits on Time's Arrow and the Holocaust, Cobra the Dread with Stalin, and the non-fiction is zealous and perspicacious and marvellous and rewardable, but the fiction's terrible, to be frank. But yes, I'm now just sort of petering on. So yes, I will. Thank you ever so much for watching BookTube. Me and my tie-dye shirt will now say goodbye.